Today I'm very, very pleased to introduce our speaker, Mike Bartolo, Dr. Mike Bartolo. He's been the manager, a research scientist, and vegetable crop specialist at the CSU Arkansas Valley Research Center. And he recently retired, but he's an expert at many, many things. And today he's going to talk to us about the history of Rocky Ford melon and Pueblo chili and how it involves CSU and our culture in Colorado. And he's been on many, many projects on different crops, everything from plasticulture, which involves drip irrigation and mulches, soil fertility, pest management, and he's an expert in the area. And I hope he's also going to share with us the difference between the growing season in the Rocky Ford area compared to up here in Fort Collins. And I know that he will give us some information that will be interesting and valuable. And I hope Mike will tell us a little bit about himself as well. I know that he has 2 grown-up kids, both getting graduate degrees, very successful. His wife has been a kindergarten teacher in the Swink School District for years, and she's highly regarded and loved. Of course, that's always an interesting thing because kindergarten teachers, I think, are the best and so kind and so caring and so helpful to those kids to get them started. You can tell that my husband and I have known Mike for a long time, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mike Bartolo.
Thank you so much, Barb, and I appreciate it. And just going back, Barb, really, I want to thank Barb and Steve. They knew me right about the time I fell off the turnip truck up at CSU in Fort Collins. So they took me under their wing. So Steve was first my mentor as a master student, and then later on as the department head. So I appreciate it. And I feel like I've got a couple of guardian angels up there in Fort Collins always watching on me. So thank you, Barb. Appreciate that. So I'll go ahead and start on my my presentation. Let me see if I can do this. Oops. I didn't do that. I think I'm messed up here. So let me see.
We can see your PowerPoint, like the full screen.
Okay, let me see if I, for some reason, I got to just kind of minimize you. That's how, there we go. There we go. Now I'm cooking. How's that, everybody? Can you see that?
Looks good.
Okay, yeah. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about kind of the history of those 2 crops we talked about, Pueblo chili and Rocky Ford cantaloupe, and really how CSU and its predecessors, Colorado Agricultural College, etc., really has played a role in that part of the state and the culture of those particular crops. So and kind of give it from the background of the research and outreach and how CSU's been so integral into that. So for those of you that don't know this, I'm sure probably all of you are somewhat familiar, is that CSU has a bunch of out-state research centers located around the state. There's actually 9 different sites dealing because of the various geography and climatic conditions we have here in Colorado. We've obviously got here and we're located about 4 hours from campus, so about an hour east of Pueblo, Colorado. The farm itself really deals with irrigated agriculture, so we've dealt with a lot of different things over the years. But as you can tell, we've got crops in this centers in the San Luis Valley that deal with potatoes, in the southwest and on the western slope that deal with fruit trees and all those things. And it's great that we have that outreach and connection to the state as a whole. The research center itself has been around, is the oldest established research center anywhere in the state. So we've been as long, just when they created research centers, we were at the same location for over 130 years. And so we've been at the exact same site. And I'm going to try to get this so I can see you guys. There we go. And so we have not only the agricultural experiment station, which we were first established at, but we also have the veterinary diagnostic lab. So this is one of 3 different sites that the veterinary diagnostic lab is located. One here in Rocky Ford. There's one at the research center now in Orchard Mesa near Grand Junction, and of course the one on campus. And so they deal primarily with working with the local veterinarians and some of the diagnostic materials. I call it CSI Rocky Ford. You know, if you've got an animal, it comes in there, it's usually not in great conditions. Its legs may be pointing toward the sky, but they'll help you diagnose whatever's wrong with that animal. Have a real good staff on there that have expanded their outreach to do things like crop testing and other things. And then recently, just a couple of years ago, we had the regional extension office for Otero County and the region moved there. So we've had an addition onto our site and now have these 3 different entities with CSU located right there in Rocky Ford. Now we've got a great rich history over that 130 years. And I've had the privilege, you know, when we had that recent construction of the extension office, we had to move a lot of stuff out of our attic, and it was amazing what was stored up in there. And so I'm in the process of going through that and kind of assessing all the historical records and that sort of things. And I had the luxury of talking with some of our people that have worked there over actually since the 1930s. I get to meet people that actually worked there in the 1930s over the years. And there's just been a tremendous wealth of things that CSU's done in their land grant mission to connect to that community. And so when we first started looking at, you know, what would actually grow there, if you can imagine, we just started farming the area. There was really people just pioneering the land, you know, starting to till the land. There were water canals dug, and we didn't really know what would grow in that part of the state. And so we were looking at things like alfalfa, which is very commonplace now, but we didn't know what would grow and what kinds of alfalfa would grow here. There's a wide range of fruit trees that grew in the area. And so at one time, there was just a tremendous amount of fruit tree production. And over time, that changed and waned. And then, of course, sugar beets were big. Just like in many parts of the state, sugar beets and sugar beet companies kind of set their pole in the ground, and they were really responsible for really developing a lot of these communities. So a lot of the sugar beet industry, people with American Crystal, sugar beet and Holly Sugar and other sugar companies came down to this part of the state and developed it. We don't have any sugar beets now in this part of the state, but they were very instrumental in developing that. And then, of course, the melon industry. Those 2 bottom pictures depict different aspects of the watermelon industry and cantaloupe industry, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a bit. So this picture, I'm just going to remind you that you have to stay on your toes in this presentation because I'm going to quiz you. I'm going to offer some little trivia questions at the time. So I like to keep people on the quiz. This is a picture that was not taken at the research center, but was just a few miles from it. Now I'm told there's a picture in this picture. There's a hired hand, a banker, and a farmer. Now, I don't know if you could pick out which is which, but I kind of got an idea which one is which one's a banker at least. So anyway, I use this slide just to depict how things have changed and how CSU has been involved in this really rapid transformation in agriculture. The bottom table represents kind of a trial that we did with corn in 1937. And this is just about the time that hybrid seed production was coming online. So we're just starting to get hybrid corn production. Before that time, we used open pollinated lines. And the yields were typically in the 70, 60, 70 bushels per acre. The top one represents our trial for corn now. And so we're looking at upwards with these new modern varieties, upwards of 300 bushels per acre. So you can see just this big transformation that a lot of land grant universities have taken part of, but CSU's really been integral. And we've had these trials throughout the years, getting that information, that technology out to the farmers. And so again, we're part of this wide extensive network that CSU's involved in. That's been from the early 1900s all the way up to today. The crops testing program that is held mostly run out of the soil and crop science department, and we work with a variety of different crops. Again, testing new varieties, getting that information out to the growers. Now, another thing we've been involved with is not only agronomic crops, but vegetable crops. And here's a great, I love this picture of onion production around 1901. And CSU's been very integral in the development of the onion industry. At one time, Colorado was one of the leading producers of onions in the state. We had over 18,000 acres of onions really just a few years ago. And that's waned a little bit because of some issues related to water and labor and other things. But it really was a big part of that. And CSU did so many things over its history to not only do the research, but the outreach to the growers to help develop that industry. And a lot of that was led by this gentleman, Dr. Almond Madison Binkley, who was a horticulturalist after first being a student with the Aggies, and then soon became the horticulturist and later the department head in horticulture. And he was responsible for a lot of the breeding that led to an onion variety called the Colorado number 6. Now that might not ring a bell for most people, but that was really one of the foundational onion varieties that was here in Colorado. In fact, it was produced anywhere from the 1930s all the way, and people still grow it today, just to show how impactful it was. And that genetics that he developed really is the foundation for a lot of the onion varieties, the other hybrids that are grown all around the Western United States. And he was responsible for that. It's what's called a sweet Spanish variety. It's a kind of a long, hard, you'll see that a lot in things like onion rings and other processed onion onion products. But it's a very, very foundational and very impactful research that he did. And of course, we were working a lot with the other research and looking at things like pest management. And I just throw this up there to show you kind of the different things and how this evolution of how we have to look at pest management and the environmental stewardship that CSU really has had at the forefront of their minds as they went through the years. And at one time we were testing chemicals that were quite honestly pretty bad on the environment, but that's what tools we had. So certainly after, the early 1900s, there weren't many technologies or many chemicals available. Soon after World War II, there became available a very big myriad of agricultural chemicals, and we didn't always know what the outcomes of those are. And so we tested those. And more recently now, we're looking more at this integrated approach where we understand there's relationships between natural environments like natural insects and natural predators and the plant itself. So we're more in tune with this kind of comprehensive understanding. And again, CSU has done so much over the years in understanding that and then relaying that information to the farmers. And again, that is really the critical part of our league. And I think, CSU, I'm a real big fan and a proponent of the land grant mission, and believe that to my core, that one of the greatest things that CSU has done is really integrate itself into the community and really relay that technology information to growers. So we've done some great research of the year, but maybe even greater than that is our relationship that we have with not only our local growers, but the communities. And that's certainly changed. When I first started, we had many growers. Now we don't have as many growers. So our relationship is not only with growers themselves, but also the entire community and understanding how we can benefit the community as a whole. But I think this land grant and the extension arm of our legacy of CSU is so important and so vitally needed, especially in this day and age where we increasingly see a kind of this division between rural and urban interests. I think that's where CSU can really shine and help bridge that divide. So with that little introduction, I'm going to talk a little bit about the melon industry. So again, be prepared. We're going to have some trivia questions, so you got to pay attention. So the melon industry, again, has been integral to the Rocky Ford area. It actually organized about the same time the CSU Center came online around 1890. Well, again, we started around 1888. And it was formed, largely credited to this gentleman here. His name G.W. Swink, or George Washington Swink, this happy-looking gentleman here. And it just so happened, by chance, that the great-grandson of George Washington Swink, Jerry Swink, was actually a good friend of mine. He was the superintendent for 30 years. He was a CSU graduate. So he actually has that relationship as well. So he lived to be well into his 90s, Jerry Swink. And I had a long opportunity to get to know him, talk to him, learn about his stories again. And he ran the research farm that I later ran for many, many years. So CSU and the melon industry really took off in the late 1880s, 1890s, and early 1900s. And obviously the town became renowned for that. He was responsible for having what's called Watermelon Day at the fair. And so what you see in the background is these large piles of watermelons. He was so happy about his harvest that every year he would give watermelons out to the public, and they would have a large, watermelon feast and handouts. And that tradition continues today. So that's a 130 plus year tradition. And of course, we have the most unique mascot anywhere in the country. Has anybody else heard of the Rocky Mountaineer as a mascot? I know there's some interesting high school mascots out there, but probably none that have the Mountaineer moniker. I always get a kick out of it because depending on who they always have a kid coming out at halftime of the football game in the Mountaineer suit. And depending what the kid is, so if they have kind of a shorter kid that doesn't look too bad, but oftentimes they'll have a tall, lanky kid, and they end up looking like a fighting cucumber. So I tell them, you got to be careful on the kid you pick for the wearing the melon suit. So that was really instrumental, taking off in the early 1900s, and then almost completely wiped out the industry by what's called a devastating disease infestation. It was called Alternaria leaf bite. They didn't know it was then called that. But CSU, or at that time, Colorado Agricultural College, and our research center was instrumental in trying to fight that. I think the industry was really on the brink of being wiped off the face of the map in that early age. And along came P.K. Blinn, who was the research center manager at the time, and in working with people on campus, developed disease-resistant varieties. And that really helped resurrect and save the industry and kept it going. Now, CSU then helped get it going in other aspects too. And there are so many, as I mentioned, seed development, and then also in shipping. Now, in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see two little boys collecting seeds. So the area in and around Rocky Ford actually developed not only in producing the fruit itself, but seed production. So CSU was responsible in helping organize that seed industry. And so these little guys out there, probably, I don't know, when you say 11 or 12 years old, young boys, they're out there they have a board with a very sharp knife on it. They cut open the melons and then they scoop out the seed. That was their job. Now, I'm not sure OSHA or anybody else let kids do that nowadays, but that's what they did. And so the area in and around Otero and Pueblo County, where Rocky Ford and Pueblo are located, became the leading producer of cucurbit seeds, things like squash, watermelon, cantaloupe, cucumbers. And they produced at one time over 90% of the seed used in the world. And CSU was instrumental in getting and organizing that industry. And obviously they needed to worry about production practices. So things like pest management, cultivation, and of course, irrigation. Irrigation is, people ask me, what do you do? And if I had to narrow it down to one word, it's water, water, water. I guess that's three words, but I want to emphasize it's water is so important, and understanding how to use that precious resource to its best ability is so important in this part of the world that we have done so many research trials conducted that. So it was very important in the early part of our history. And then of course, things, that are dealing with harvest practices. And here's just pictures that depict these practices. In the early 1900s, they used to take these melons, pack them in wooden crates, and then pack them on rail cars and ship them all the way to New York City. So there was a lot we needed to learn, and a lot we needed research we needed to do related to post-harvest physiology. In the top left-hand corner is how it's still harvested today. So we mainly have hand labor that harvests that melon crop. And so that's becoming an issue that I'll touch on here in a bit. So here's my trivia question. So here you guys, are you guys interested? So you could either shout it out, come off mute and shout it out, or you could type it in the chat. Probably shout it out because I can't look at it. Whoever comes up first is going to win this. So I'm looking for just a one-word answer in this trivia question. And I'm going to read two different things and they're related, but the answer to those things are the same word, same single word. Okay, here we go. A lunar explorer and a sound a pollinator makes. Anybody got a question?
Buzz.
Buzz, you're right. Buzz. Who said Buzz? Okay, Peggy. Okay, Buzz. So yeah, that's the answer. Buzz. It's pretty. I'm throwing you a softball, initial one. So it's Buzz. So Buzz Aldrin and pollinators. And pollinators and bee. That's a whole nother thing that I'm not going to go on. But pollinators are so important to melon production.
Mike is muted. The speaker needs to unmute.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yep, you are.
Okay, sorry. Did you got that? You got the end of the trivia question then, right? That was, I don't know why it got us to hit some. Anyway, starting in the 1980s, late 1980s, first with Dr. Jim Ells, and then later I started working on this, is the conversion to what's called drip irrigation. And so for those of you that aren't familiar, these little rolls that are on this tractor that look like big spools, they're plastic tape that are kind of like, soaker hoses. They have small orifices about every 12 inches on them, and they help deliver minute amounts of water just to the base of the plant. And so we started seeing first the research, the outreach, and then the conversion of many of the melon producers to this form of irrigation where we can really conserve water. So we're looking at putting on anywhere what we call probably 50% less water with the melon crop. So it's really was amenable to producing melons with this drip irrigation. The next was the use of, concurrently with that, was plastic mulches. So we started examining the use of both plastic, other types of colored mulches. And what plastic mulches do is, if you can imagine, underneath that sheet of plastic is that drip hose. And so we're conserving even more water by placing that barrier to evaporation to the surface. And what the black plastic does is it helps warm the soil and it accelerates the development of the crop. So not only do we get that water saving effect, but we get an increase or the extension of the growing season. So normally we were looking at producing melons starting at about, August. We increased that by about 3 or 4 weeks. And so we looked at not only, using that as a way to extend the season, conserve water, but also improve the quality of the plant, because the melons grow on the ground. They're not touching any soil. They're with this plastic mulch, they're not getting wet when it rains. So it's a very amenable to increasing productivity. We've seen anywhere from 50 to 75, even a doubling of the yields with this type of production method. And here's another example of that. Some melons on the left growing, and then you can see on the right is plastic. These are actually, these are cantaloupe. But what this plastic culture also made possible was the growth of seedless watermelons. Seedless watermelons are very difficult to grow, and they almost require, they have to be grown from a transplant. And that makes them very weak and susceptible to drying out. And using plastic mulch really helped advance that particular crop is seedless watermelons. And I'll talk to you a little bit if anybody has questions about seedless watermelons. I can talk about it later. But seedless watermelons now are a big crop down here, and that's all because of the advancement and use of plastic mulches. Another thing we're doing is working on some other kind of nutritional and kind of health benefits of melons. So recently, in these last few years, we were in collaboration with some of my colleagues in the San Luis Valley and on campus, looking at some of the nutritional qualities. So we know Rocky Ford melons taste good, but how are they good for you? And as we get and develop new varieties, what is the biochemical and health benefits of those particular varieties? So that's a recent study that we did. We're looking at both the texture. So we want a melon that's going to be able to shift and moved around. And then also one that has all these attributes, not only the sweetness that we've become accustomed to, but also some of these other health attributes that help have other health outcomes, whether it be reducing the incidence of cancers, diabetes, and other chronic illnesses that we're so much more aware of it. And I think that's very important because CSU is really poised to be a leader in this arena, particularly in the horticulture department, where they have so many people working on this crops and the intersection of crops and health. So I'd be remiss not talking about another thing that happened in the cantaloupe industry. And some of you maybe recall that. I don't know, does anybody recall about 10 years ago, we had a very serious issue associated with health and the presence of listeria and a lot of unfortunate things. People actually died from this. And it was emanated from a farm near Holly, Colorado, which is in the extreme eastern part of the valley. Very unfortunate thing. So it really set the whole industry on its ear. And, it was a very difficult time for everybody down here that it was part of our soul was, oh my gosh, what do we do? What are we going to do when we have such a traumatic thing that happened? But I think at any time of all the years I worked with CSU, I was never so amazed and proud and encouraged by what CSU did to step up to the plate. This came out of the blue, and I can't tell you enough how important was how many people from across the university in different departments in health and human nutrition and even animal science and obviously horticulture came together to support that industry and to really, drop what they're doing to really do so much. And I can't, like I said, it's hard for me to explain even 10 years later, how grateful I am and how proud I was even under these difficult circumstances of CSU and what they did. And I think that was a real example of their land grant mission. So many great people, and I could name a bunch, but I know I miss a few, but there are just so many great people that stepped up to live out that land grant mission. And since then, the industry has changed, and a lot of that is again to the things that CSU did. They were very instrumental in developing this culture of food safety, and so a lot of the industry changed. It changed our industry. We lost a lot of the shippers. Some of them just decided, I'm not going to grow melons anymore. I'm done. It's just too expensive. We had some that just said, I'm going to bite the bullet, invest millions of dollars in my packing facility and go from there. And so it was a very traumatic time, but as we come through it, I think we're in a place where we're much better. And a large of that could be attributed to the great work that CSU did. So what's next for the melon industry? There's some dark clouds looming ahead, but there's always challenges in agriculture. We have issues with water. We have issues with, the food safety issue, competition from other things. Probably the biggest thing that faces us now is the labor issue. And so I see, looking at in the future, how we're going to deal with that. The cost of labor, the availability of labor is very, very challenging, and helps us, it can really not keep us very competitive. So I could see relying more on technology. So I think CSU's role may be coming part in that. But another thing that we're really involved in is helping to organize the industry and organize farmers all around the state. What we finally realized, I grew up on a farm family, and my farmers want to be very independent and they don't want to be doing, but we have to realize that we as farmers need to come together to work on issues that are of the same concern, whether you're a peach grower or a melon grower or a chili grower, whatever. And so CSU was very instrumental in helping to organize them, to give them information about food safety or labor or other things, and through a couple of organizations. One is the Rocky Ford Growers Association, and then more comprehensively is the Colorado Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association. This is an organization we helped put together about 7 or 8 years ago that brings all these states together, and CSU then has a great conduit to bring information to those group of farmers around the state. So now I'm going to talk about Pueblo chili next. So peppers, for those of you who know, are a very diverse crop, very diverse. I make the analogy, they're like dogs. So they're the same species. So German Shepherd and a Chihuahua are the same species, but they're very diverse in how they look at. And peppers really of that same kind of thing. There's been selected over the years to look very, very diverse, where you got small peppers, big peppers, all kinds of shapes and sizes, but all generally the same species. They have their unique evolutionary origin. Peppers are one of those New World's crop. It really evolved from an evolutionary standpoint in South and Central America. And they weren't really destined to be a human food. You know, the ones that are growing out in the wild are very small and colorful and very, very pungent, very high in heat chemicals. And I'll talk about that in a second. And really from an evolutionary standpoint, they evolved to be disseminated by birds, because birds can't sense that heat sensation. So mammals can. So they really weren't intended for mammals, including humans, to be eaten. But birds, from an evolutionary standpoint, were the ways they were disseminated. They were, again, when Christopher Columbus came to the New World, he was looking for other types of spices, including, you know, the regular type salt and pepper type pepper. That's how they got their name peppers, is that it was kind of a misnomer, is that they had that same kind of pungency or spices as regular pepper, and that's how they received the moniker pepper. So what the heat's seeking, everybody says, where does the heat come from? The heat comes from actually not the seeds, as people sometimes say, it's not the seeds, but actually there's glands along what's called the placental issue. There's kind of an orange streak. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but it's this orange streak that secretes kind of an oily type substance. And that substance is collectively called capsaicin. There's actually different kinds of capsaicin, some that really burn your mouth and some that dissipate quite rapidly. And there's different forms of capsaicin, but collectively they are called capsaicin, and they're secreted in this oily substance, or it's an oily substance along this placental membrane. So if you carefully remove that, you can reduce the amount of heat. And again, people ask me, well, how do you get the heat sensation? Well, you don't necessarily do it by drinking water. Water sometimes will spread it around more. So you want, people oftentimes say ice cream or some kind of, you know, protein-based milk or milk or type things will help dissolve that oily type substance a little bit better. I know there's some food scientists maybe on here that can explain that phenomenon a little better than I can. So here's my next trivia question. So character in Charlotte's Web, a well-known children's book, and in the inventor of organoleptic test for peppers. That's a little tougher one. So organoleptic means just the heat test for looking for a what? Yep. Ever remember any characters in Charlotte's Web?
Who was pig?
There was a pig. So who said the pig?
You did.
I said Wilbur.
Wilbur. Who said Wilbur? All right.
Oh yeah, Wilbur. Yeah.
Wilbur. So that's the answer. Is Mr. this gentleman here. His name was Wilbur Scoville. So we got Wilbur the pig and Wilbur Scoville. So Wilbur, this great, I wish I could grow a mustache like they had just great mustaches back in those days, didn't they? Anyway, he developed this test for peppers that, you know, had this Scoville, what's called the Scoville rating, where peppers can go from very mild, like bell peppers, all the way to, you know, high amounts. So my next question. This one's even harder. This shouldn't cause you trepidation, according to the 1970s rock band Blue Oyster Cult and the world's hottest pepper. What do they have in common? That word, one word I'm seeking. This is a tough question. Give up. Has anybody heard the song? There was a song called "Don't Fear the Reaper." Have you remember that song? That's a little bit stretch. So there was a song called "Don't Fear the hottest pepper" is called the Carolina Reaper, and it has a Scoville rating of about 2 million Scoville units. And so, for example, a spicy jalapeno might have a Scoville rating of 10,000 Scoville ratings. You know, a bell pepper has 0. A typical Anaheim chili might have 2,000 Scoville units. Some of the cayenne peppers might have 40,000. This has 2 million Scoville ratings. I'm not sure why people want to eat this, but they do. And there's always somebody that'll eat that. So anyway, I'll talk a little bit in my few minutes here about the history of the Pueblo chili. The Pueblo chili is a great crop. Again, as I mentioned, all chilies peppers usually originated in South and Central America. We can figure out from an anthropology standpoint that the Pueblo chili originated in the Oaxaca region of Mexico. And usually what happened is the indigenous peoples there would grow a particular strain or what's called a land race of chili, and then grow it for years and years and years. And that's what we think happened to this Pueblo chili. It was what we refer to as the mira sol. So anybody familiar with Spanish, mira means looking, sol means sun. So it points upward, it has that characteristic. And that's what makes it, how it got the moniker as mira sol. So it was a land race, we think, growing in the Oaxaca region of Mexico. Around 1900, a man by the name of Fabian Garcia, who worked for what is now New Mexico State University, is largely credited going into Mexico and finding those land races of Pueblo chilies, different indigenous chilies, and then bringing them to the United States for improvement and cultivation. And that's how we think that got it to our best of our ability. And so we know that around 1910, this mira sol, or this original land race of chili, made its way into the Pueblo area to be grown and cultivated. And anybody of you that are familiar with Pueblo know that it's kind of a melting pot, as it is very famous for its steel industry and this mining industry. And so that was kind of a magnet for a lot of different cultures in the world coming here. There's a lot of people from Mexico, Italy, Eastern Europe, and that's how actually my family made it here. Is my grandparents and they came to this country from Italy and started working first as miners, then farmers in that area, growing Pueblo chili. So we continue that, and CSU through the years has done that. When I started working, I started doing some selections of that original land race. And in about 20 years ago, we released a variety out of that original. So I took that original land race of chili and began making selections out of it and developed a variety called Moscow, M-O-S-C-O. And that was actually named after a farmer that happened to be my uncle, who actually gave me the original seed to develop that. And so this is how kind of the family tree of it started, as that original land race of Pueblo chili on the bottom. And then from that, I've made, maybe 500 different selections over the years. One called the Pueblo Popper, one called Moscow, one called Jidon, and then we have others that are going to be hopefully released sometime in the future. So one of the things we were selecting for is wall thickness. So anybody who's familiar with food and what we really wanted is a pepper that was really thick meated, because it held up to this roasting process. This is done in one of those, and probably some of you have seen these big commercial tumblers of chilies, how they're roasted, but you can do that in your own stove or on your barbecue or everything. But that's typically how a lot of chili is prepared in this type of cuisine, is kind of going through these fire roasted process. And so we wanted a chili that was going to be held up to that. In addition to variety trials and variety testing, we've obviously done many types of trials with through CSU and the Research Center using drip irrigation. We looked at ways of having a protection structure or a colored shaded structure over it to protect it from sunburn and to produce colored bell peppers. We've done seed development and variety increases. And then we've also looked at the pungency or the heat of our varieties and the biochemical analysis, much like we did for cantaloupe, looking at some of those health attributes. So here's just a picture of showing peppers being grown with this drip irrigation and plastic mulch. Here's another example of that, and we've done that over the years. And then, of course, we're looking at the other health attributes, including vitamins and other flavonoids, other types of things like that. And of course, everybody wants to know how the pungency, you know, that's the big selling point, is how spicy are your peppers. So we've looked at peppers at different stages of development, where they're green or they're red or where they're roasted or not roasted and so forth. So that's been a big part of it. And so from that, really, you know, the industry has probably in the last 20 years taken off tremendously. And there's been a lot of kind of other industries spur off of that, include now chilies and just about every type of product you can imagine. You know, there's a sriracha, I think there's a company up in Boulder that makes a chocolate incorporated with Pueblo chili. There's another company in Pueblo that's cheese, there's jams, there's a beer that has chili in it. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be a train. It's quite delicious, to be honest with you. It's really good. And then of course, there's other types of products. And again, CSU was instrumental in using that. And they did a lot with the cottage food industry and helping to get these businesses up and running. So a lot of different things have emanated from some of those initial things that CSU did. And then of course, there's some other cultural things that affect it. One of the big things that the whole chili is influenced is kind of this agritourism type concept. So both CSU and CSU Pueblo has been involved in this, is with the Colorado, or the Pueblo Chili and Frijoles Festival. It's a large annual festival that draws upwards of 150,000 people a year to the town. So it's a great way of producing economic development. And then another thing that's kind of risen off of this whole chili culture is what's called the Pueblo Food Project. And it's, again, not only to stimulate these auxiliary businesses that develop off of Pueblo chili, but also has expanded in helping to meet, you know, the health consequences, improve the health consequences of the children and adults in Pueblo County in terms of having access to food and having access to healthy food. Pueblo has not experienced a lot of the same, I guess, healthiness as other parts of the state. They have one of the highest, you know, childhood obesities, highest other chronic illnesses. And we feel that CSU and this whole food culture, this whole food system can be improved dramatically. And again, CSU is part of that. So here's my last question. This one's hopefully easy. So a skinny republic and fruit of capsicum annum.
Chili.
I hear somebody whisper
Chili.
chili.
Yeah, chili.
Okay, chili. Great. So that final one is chili. So that's my final answer. So with that, I just want to say thank you for the past 42 years. These are my helpers. These are my helpers out in the field. These are my son and daughter when they were little. They are now 23 and 27 respectively. And CSU was gracious enough. They allowed me to do a lot. They were a lot of my testers on my watermelon field. So they're out here in my watermelon test plots, testing my variety trial. And it's been an honor and such a pleasure. And I can't thank CSU enough for being such a part of my life and my family's life. But I think we often forget how influential CSU and important CSU is beyond the city limits of Fort Collins. And you certainly have in my life and in this part of the state. So I do want to thank them. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mike, I'll start. How long does it take to develop a variety of pepper? I know for potatoes, it's about 14 years.
Yeah, and that's probably about right. You know, I keep telling everybody if I would have worked for a commercial seed company, I probably would have been fired about 20 years ago. So I just do a very slow and deliberate type of selection process, and it's such a kind of a niche market that but it's a tremendously long time, and you go down so many dead ends, and so especially when you're looking for some of these very kind of minor type things. But what I'm hopefully is getting a pepper that is a little bit milder, and I think hopefully that'll still have those flavor attributes, but maybe acceptable to a wider demographic. Than most people that eat a lot of chili want it fiery hot. I mean, that will buy bushels and bushels of chili. So I'm looking for something that maybe have a wider appeal to a larger segment of the population.
Mm-hmm. And I know Paul Gruen at Penn State used to do some research on, I'm not sure, capsicum, anyway, the compound that in like ointments can reduce pain.
Sure.
Lots of medicinal things. Have you, do you have any people working on that, or has anybody continued to look at that?
No, not really. But I really think there's, like I said, there's so many unknown attributes of our foods that we produce that we don't understand what the health attributes of them. So I think we can begin purposely breeding and selecting for those health attributes rather than just something that looks good or yields a lot. We can start selecting for that. You know, I believe in that philosophy that was, I think it was Aristotle said that, you know, food is our medicine. And I believe that. And I think we need to, you know, we're real opposed to do that at CSU. I wish I had another 20 or 30 years to go, but I don't. So but hopefully that'll be important for the next generation of researchers.
Micah, this is Jennifer Anderson.
Hey, Jennifer, how are you? Good to see you.
Oh, good. It's good to see you. I remember the trying time that our department had regarding the cantaloupe and working closely with Pat and Marissa. But I remember one aspect that we always get into this day: people fail to wash their own cantaloupe. They get it out of the store, and I would say to anybody listening, make sure you use a brush on a cantaloupe because the skin is rough. And we found that was really, really a factor in this in terms of consumption for people. So make sure you scrub them well. And
yes.
Mike, I thank you for your work because you've got two foods there that are rich in antioxidants and healthful ingredients. So it's good to see you. And I wish you a really, really good and healthy retirement.
And then thank you, Jennifer. I know you were very helpful. Like I said, the whole department was just incredibly, you know, it was amazing.
Well,
good people.
That was the food.
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah, right.
You're welcome.
Another question? I guess we have
Let's see. Young, unmute.
Yeah.
There you
Hello.
go.
I have a question. You mentioned along with the cantaloupe, how do you produce seedless cantaloupe or any other fruits seedless?
So seedless watermelon is kind of unique, is that it's produced from a very interesting genetic cross where it's called a triploid. So most organisms contain two sets of chromosomes. You get one set for your male and one set for your female to form the new organisms. In watermelon, seedless watermelon, they're called triploids. So they instead of containing two sets of chromosomes, they contain three. So it's a little bit complicated, but I use the analogy, it's like crossing a donkey and a horse and you get a mule. The mule is sterile. And that's kind of the same analogy, is that the resulting seed can actually grow into a plant, just like a mule can grow up, but it's sterile. It doesn't produce any seeds. And that's what it is. So it's produced from this very unique cross. And then you put those seeds, grow out the plants and grow them out, but they themselves don't produce any seeds, but they're pretty fragile in their initial stages of development. But right now, that's most people, most commercial chains, you know, the big grocery store chains want seedless watermelons. I prefer seeded watermelons. I mean, you gotta spit a watermelon seed once in a while. You know, that's the whole fun of it. I eat watermelon seeds. I like to munch on them too. But and Jennifer probably could correct me. You're not going to have a watermelon grow in your stomach if you eat a watermelon.
No,
No.
no. Good fiber, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You're very welcome.
That was really, really nice. You were able to step in and provide us the most interesting talk, Mike.
You're welcome. Is there any
Lana?
more questions or?
Lana, unmute. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. I am wondering if there's any nutritional benefit to the watermelon rind that you've found.
You know, that's a good question, and I maybe Jennifer might have that better than I do. I would assume there's some, but I don't know. To be honest with you.
I don't know either.
Okay.
I'm not sure that they make watermelon pickles, Lana. I
Yeah.
mean, I remember my mother-in-law would make watermelon pickles. Pretty popular back there in Iowa, where my husband was from. But in terms of nutritional value, there's obviously going to be fiber. Does it have any other of the antioxidants? I couldn't tell you.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Let's all give Mike a big hand. Very
Okay, thank
interesting,
you very much for having me.
helpful.
Thank you.
And if you're ever down in Rocky Ford, please look me up. You're always got a place to stay. You're always welcome down here. And I wish you well. Thanks again,
Great
Barb.
talk.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
You.